I also want to say a very special thank you to this congregation for their hosting us here. This is the first annual meeting we've had in a local congregation for many, many years. It was something that had been suggested in several evaluations, and we thought it was worth a try, and we could not have had better partners in this year of experiment. As we've moved through the year, we've had to figure out how to do all those things within the convention center experience that we've taken for granted, uncover some of those possibilities we had by having the opportunity of using this facility, and figure out the best roles and ways for staffing the meeting. There were some times of difficult conversations, but through the graciousness and persistence of all those involved, we figured our way through it. The hospitality of this facility and the members and staff of this church has been a gift to all of us, and for that, thank you. One more special thanks that in some ways is redundant of some of those other things that I've already covered. As many of you know, about 3 weeks ago, I was hit hard by the flu and then bronchitis. I was pretty much knocked out for a little more than 2 weeks and really unable to work. I'm still in a little bit of recovery mode. As you've heard coughing somewhere in the room, there's a good chance that's me. Needless to say, the timing of it, this close to this year's annual meeting, was really unfortunate. While Lauren helped me move towards health at home, Arlene, Christine, and Brandon all really stepped up to do some of the annual meeting things, as well as the rest of the committee, that I simply could not do while lying down on a couch with a high fever, staring at the wall, and coughing. I was supposed to be helping Kent and Heidi a little bit more with worship planning than I could, and while considering what wonderful work they've done putting together the worship services, maybe it's better that I wasn't in the way at all. But I do just want to start off my report with a special thanks to all these folks. I still have the occasionally annoying cough, but they're giving me the space I needed to be sick and focus on health. It was really a true gift, so thank you to all of you. Now, in its own odd, strange way, there was some good news in this. Unless you were specifically trying to get a hold of me, and I know I still owe a few of you phone calls, the work of the conference continued without a hitch. This is no small thing for this conference. When we began our work together a little more than 3 years ago, this conference had gone through so many transitions in staffing, in this position in particular, that the conference had become very institutionally centered, particularly around the role of the conference minister. There was a bit of a backlog of decisions and actions that could not be made. One of the basic goals that many of you heard me say before is that I hope that the conference would get to a point where that if I were to walk out the door and be hit by a bus, people would be sad. But the work of the conference would not be so dependent solely on the work of the conference minister that the basic work of the conference would be able to continue. Now, I still plan on crossing the street very carefully. But the fact that during this time I was hit by a viral and bacterial bus, the work of the conference continued, is a sign of our collective health. Yes, there are always ways we could become healthier. It says it right there. This is not timed. There are always ways we can become healthier and improve the work that we do. That's normal. As the different parts of our conference become healthier, it ups our expectations of what still greater health can be. The momentum we have collectively built in this direction is exciting and good. The work and authority of the conference is, instead of being centered in only the conference offices, has become more clearly spread out among the committees, churches, regions, and new and renewed relationships within and beyond the conference. This is a key change that's important to take some time to talk a little more about. As the institution of the conference becomes more stable and effective, the aspect of conference life that is a movement is beginning to emerge and grow. Although there are many ways in which we in the church compare our work and structure to the work of government, businesses, and nonprofits, there are also some ways in which we are significantly different, and where we in the United Church of Christ are different from many other denominations too. Our congregational expectations, our commitments through covenant, and our emphasis on the possibility that individual conscience is a vehicle for the moving of the Holy Spirit means that our health is defined somewhat differently than these other structures. When working at its best, the movement that we collectively call the UCC defines the work of the institutions of the UCC. At its best, the movement directs the institution, and the institution enhances the work of the movement. At its best, the work of the institution is expanded based on the needs of the movement as opposed to institutionalization being the goal of the movement. At its best, the work of our church is carried out contextually and relationally as opposed to through centralized and prescribed structures. At our best, we are able to discern those places where we collectively need unity and to lovingly celebrate those places where our diversity makes us collectively stronger, more adaptable, and more effective. Now, that's not to say that there's no place for the institution. When working at its best, the institutional life of the church starts things up and then at the appropriate moment gets out of the way sometimes. As we're working towards the unfolding life of the UCC Environmental Justice Center at Pilgrim Firs, we know that if we do it right, this partnership between the national church and our conference will not end here. There will be resources that come out of this program and go nationally and internationally and vice versa. This piece that begins with our institutional life comes out of the demands of our movement life. And if we do it right, we'll eventually expand our movement life. Within this conference, we're in the process of starting several groups based on the vocations of our members. These groups are being started with two simple primary goals. The first is to discern the relationships between vocation and faith. The second is to discern how the skills of various vocations may best be used to serve God, the church, and the world. We've already had one meeting of lawyers and hope to have a couple more meetings before we begin groups for educational professionals, architects, health professionals, artists, and several other vocations. If we do it right, there will be a point where these groups will move from being institutionally driven and created to becoming part of our movement work. The institutional life of our church at its best also gives appropriate resistance for our movement work. We're seeing around the world open movement rebellion against inappropriate institutional wielding of power and resources. Where that happens, it should be resisted and needs to be resisted. I think we've become more and more institutionally able to provide appropriate resistance. Appropriate resistance is the questions asked by the Committee on Ministry of candidates for ministry on your behalf. Appropriate resistance is the questions of budget for programs and insisting on relationships of mutual accountability. Appropriate resistance is calling the conference to be true to its commitments to covenant. Appropriate resistance is evaluating staff and holding staff accountable where they are also free to name the resources that are needed. Appropriate resistance is insisting on legal and safety compliance within the life of the conference. There is still a need for the institutional life of the church and the ways that we can give appropriate resistance. And with most appropriate resistance, it makes us stronger. That said, I've got a formula in my head that I confess is based more on observation and gut than any other specific data. Gut. I think that the most effective and healthy expression of church on all its levels is no more than 1/3 institution and no less than 2/3 a movement. On a local church level, I've seen the most effective churches devote their collective energy towards mission, community involvement, vital worship, Christian formation, and the arts. This doesn't mean that the concerns regarding budget, building, staffing, safety, and general administration aren't an emphasis. But the question becomes how these resources can best be used to serve the movement of the church. The line between stability and stagnancy is sometimes a thin one. We can neither be all ship and no sail, nor all sail and no ship. I think there are ways in which our conference is moving more and more towards this too. It's been important for us to strengthen the institutional life of our conference over the past few years, and as we do, the movement piece of our work is changing. As the committees of the conference become more stable, they're moving from task completion to celebrating the mission emerging among them. Talk to those involved in the various committees of conference life, and you can begin begin to hear the change. Several of the youth leaders of the conference have begun to meet together for support and idea sharing, and through this work, the focus of the committees are changing too. Pastors are increasingly beginning to meet together for mutual support and seeking out opportunities to be in supportive conversations with each other. Folks within the life of the conference are increasingly utilizing their relationships within the conference as resources to create a fuller and more vibrant collective life. Geeks for Jesus, our friends over here on the right, is not an official group within the life of the conference, but is vital to our meeting together. The attempt to begin to bring together vocational groups is an open-ended opportunity because all of these collections of folks are able to find each other because of their relationships through the conference. This movement dynamic is not just an important part of conference life, but it is conference life at its most vital. As we become still more vital, the movement part of our work will only enlarge. Many of you have heard me say before that I hear every complaint as an offer to volunteer. As we move further and further into vitality, if we do it right, we will increasingly hear less complaints and celebrate the calls, the opportunities, and purposes that God is offering to us.